Hello and welcome. A really entertaining and interesting Coach's Corner, at least I believe that will be the case today. We are going to begin to branch into college baseball in a little different format. And, Coach Serrano and I are really excited to welcome a third member to the Coach's Corner staff or club. You will recognize the name almost immediately, the name Rojas in baseball. For me, it's Kansas City Royals and Cookie Rojas. And for me, it's also with Victor Rojas, MLB Network, Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, or my day it was the California Angels. But first and foremost, welcome aboard, Victor, and thank you for joining Dave and I today.
It's an honor and a pleasure, and I'm glad I can dumb down the show for you guys, because you guys are at such a high level that you needed some levity, and I'm here to kind of bring that to the table.
Okay, well, you have the professional background. You dominate the background stage, apparently. I think what our goal is here, and always has been, is to really keep parents informed, updated. And, recently we had some legislation that was passed, and it was kind of lingering in the halls of Congress, but it has to do with college athletics, and obviously college baseball being one of them. And I thought it would be a good idea for us to start to discuss and kind of share our thoughts and opinions for parents and student athletes to some of the changes that are currently going on and will be going on over the next 8 to 24 months. So I'm going to start with Charlie Baker. So Charlie Baker is now the head of the NCAA, and he is the former Massachusetts governor and was hired or recruited by the NCAA because of his political contacts within Congress, political circles, because of the antitrust. This whole legislation that was recently passed with regard to paying athletes is largely due to a settlement with regard to antitrust. So that is where we will begin today's topic, with the Power Five becoming, for lack of a better term, professional status to the Power Five schools. And let's start with Dave. Dave, you were a big-time Power Five coach, and what are your thoughts when you heard that news initially?
Well, it's kind of twofold, to be honest with you. I think the Power Five definitely continues to separate themselves from others. They definitely will take the lead in this. My fondness is for the so-called mid-major, which is a word I really don't like to use. I've never really used that. The majority of my career was coaching at a so-called mid-major, if you want to consider a four-time national champion Cal State Fullerton a mid-major, but it's the reality of it. I always felt in baseball, it didn't matter the size of your school or, it's a conference. Anyone could win the national championship because baseball is the most unique sport of all the sports. I find it really interesting, though, with how they will move forward with this. In regards to how it affects certain sports like baseball and softball and sports like that. But what does it do to some of the other sports on campuses? Are they going to cut sports to be able to afford this for a sport like baseball? I just don't know, because of it being a non-revenue sport, where the money is going to come from some of these schools that are going to try to afford the amount of scholarships and stipends that everyone will get on a roster. So great for the players. Don't get me wrong. I've always said this. I've said this in every house I've ever sat in. And in the recruiting, I wish I could give everyone the same amount of money. Okay, I wish I could do that, because it's class distinction when you give a certain player some money and another one another chunk of money. It doesn't mean one's more important than the other. It's just what you have for those positions. But I think the other thing it's going to do, Walter, is it's going to really emphasize the good recruiters out there now. Because with everything equal across the board, now it's going to be a coaching staff really winning someone over on their development, on their facilities. All that stuff's going to matter now, because that player can go to school X, Y, and Z and get the same amount of money covered by that university. So a lot of interesting things. I'm just, you said the 8 to 24 months, there's going to be a lot of change in college sports, especially the sport of baseball that we're talking about. A lot of change. And I really think that parents, upcoming players, I think it's going to be important to be on the cusp of every change that's going on, because it's going to affect you directly.
And one of the interesting parts for all three of us is, as parents, we've all gone through the youth baseball experience and then obviously the college recruiting experience. We all have some connections to professional baseball, but what does this, Victor, in your mind, what does this do to the youth levels of baseball? Because now we're seeing a professional component, the private equity and the, venture capital corporations getting involved with as young as 8 to 12-year-olds. And now it's almost as if, as parents, you're looking for an ROI from as young as 8 all the way now through college. You're going to look for that return on investment, right? If I choose your program, what are you going to do for me? What are you going to give me? That's kind of the direction we're taking, is it not?
How much time do we have, Walter? I mean, that's a pretty loaded question right there. It's unique, and I think, although the news came out about the settlement came out last week, I think there's still a ton of things that need to be worked out. So we've seen kind of like the 30,000-foot view of what the settlement looks like. But I think as you start to dig into it, I think there's a lot more factors that still need to get flushed out. You mentioned the term, the antitrust. NCAA needs to get an antitrust exemption if they're going to operate as a capitalistic entity, as it appears that they're going to, and start paying their athletes. You're going to have to find some uniformity across all 50 states as you implement these rules. You can't treat one institution in one state the same way you would in a different state, because the rules and state laws are different. So you have to find some uniformity in all of that. And then you're going to have to figure out the separation. And Dave brought it up too, of the revenue generating and the non-revenue generating sports. Obviously, the revenue generating sports, it's football, men's basketball, women's basketball. Those are the three revenue generating sports, true generating sports in the NCAA right now. And so how do you figure all of that out? And then the other part of this whole equation as it gets flushed out is, how is this number, whatever that number ends up being, that athletic departments will be able to disperse, how are they going to disperse those funds? Are they going to be it equally? Is it going to be, we're going to divvy the pie equally among the sports? Is it going to be skewed 75% towards football and then kind of go from there with all the rest of the sports? And how does that impact other schools? I mean, and I'm just throwing out schools. Will TCU have the same amount of money for its baseball program as Texas A&M will? And I think that those are all these questions that still, and this is not even factoring in the NIL. NIL is going to stay the same. Right. The collectives will still continue. So there's a ton of questions. How it relates to the amateur side, I think I don't know that it's going to change it a whole lot. I think you're going to get more players or athletes and families really kind of start leaning on the advisors as they get into that recruiting kind of class for that point. And for that reason is how you negotiate with universities. The one thing that I see happening is that the information is going to be out there when you start talking about paying players, especially state schools that have to give up their information. But I think athletes are already geared at the lower levels, at the young amateur levels, travel ball and such, that are already geared towards that mentality of, where do I get my money? And by where do I get my money being, where do I get my scholarship? That's all going to go away. And one last thing, and I know we touched on this briefly in a text exchange. It'll be interesting to see how institutions use the disbursement of funds and paying players as it relates to scholarships. Are scholarships now going to go away? And by that, I mean, if an institution says, I'm going to give you $100,000 a year, but you're responsible for your expenses, and that includes tuition, books, room and board, so on and so forth. How does that come into play? So I think there's still a lot of things that need to unfold, and anybody that tells you that they've got it all figured out, they're probably lying to you, because I think the writing's not yet dry on what this really is going to look like. It's good that we've got some movement going forward on it, and we've got the Power Fives all agreeing on it. But to Dave's point, how does it impact everybody as you talk about college baseball in general? And I think that's the unknown, and that's the scary part for a lot of families, because that top 1% guy is going to go to a Power 5 school for the most part. But how does it impact those guys going somewhere else?
Well, the bigger part of this, Dave, is a lot of parents are now left with the question, or a lot of families, I guess, what is the pathway now to college? It used to be the pathway would kind of go through the summer baseball circuit, maybe a showcase, maybe a college camp. But now, in light of all of these upcoming changes, you're going to start to see a lot of moving parts, free agency, for lack of a better term. But what is, for the non 1%, let's say the 80 to 85% of the high school graduating seniors, what is their pathway to college? What is it going to look like? Is it going to be an entry point through a lower division, lower level of college, and then hope to put a resume, quote unquote, together? Is that what you foresee potentially happening within the sport?
Well, let me answer this first. After hearing you and Victor talk, I'm taking this in. And as you know, I'm very old school in my ways. And I think I grew up in a great generation, and I was around a lot of coaches that taught me how to do things right. My biggest fear in all this, I think the athletes win in this, definitely, and they deserve it. I think they're making a lot of money for these universities off all these TV contracts and all that. But at the end of the day, is this going to cloud the direction of what they're trying to do from an academic standpoint and an athletic standpoint? Are they going to be so focused at ages 10 to 12 that they're worrying about playing in the major leagues? Because for a lot of kids, this is their major leagues. This is their major leagues, okay? And so do they lose their focus of where their feet are at that point of their life because they're already worried about what they're going to be like to be able to go to school? My answer is easy to that. The best pathway is put your head down and work hard. I mean, that's very old school, but put your head down and work hard and control what you can control. And when you're 15, 16, and 17 years old, and you're trying to be attractive to one of those schools that is going to take care of a lot of the finances for you, for education and everything, is don't stop working. And someone's going to find you. Someone's going to find you. And, the way recruiting is now with all the technology and synergy, and every guy that I'm recruiting this summer, we pull up Synergy and we can find most of these guys. Okay. So it's not hard to find guys, even if you don't see them with your own eyes. So again, as Victor said, there's a lot of unanswered questions out there. I just hope where this benefits the athlete, I hope it doesn't hurt the student athlete, because they lose focus of what the main thing is. And that's, one, get an education, and two, be good enough to be able to go to one of those schools.
And I think, parents need to understand, or I think collectively the sport needs to understand that you were a longtime coach, player at Cal State Fullerton. What happens at a school like Cal State Fullerton? There's no football team. There's no basketball team that I'm aware of with regard to the NCAA. I haven't seen them. But, I mean, does Cal State Fullerton now, do they fall back? What happens to the West Coast? Like, where those schools are all coming east. Washington, Oregon, UCLA, USC, Big Ten, Stanford, Cal, ACC. You get a lot of Big 12 schools, but where, Fullerton, Fresno State, those are two schools that have won a College World Series. Victor, where do those schools go? Like, from a baseball perspective, they have storied programs.
Yeah, and don't forget Arizona State, and Utah going to the Big 12 as well. So you are losing. I mean, you talk about two. When I was growing up in the 80s and watching college baseball in the College World Series, Arizona and Arizona State. Mm-hmm. Arizona State with O.W. McDowell and Barry Bonds and all those guys. I mean, that's what I grew up on. Those are two big powerhouse programs from a baseball perspective. Have been. Arizona's been able to maintain it a little bit longer than Arizona State. But still, they're leaving the West Coast to go to the Big 12. So I don't know. I think it's a wonderful question. Grand Canyon's going the other way. They're leaving the WAC to go to the West Coast Conference. Program like Pepperdine. I was just chatting with Tim Montez, who was a pitching coach under Andy Lopez at Pepperdine when Pepperdine was a pretty good program at Malibu. And all of a sudden, it's like they're an afterthought. I mean, I went there on a recruiting trip. I stood at home plate and I looked out to the Pacific Ocean. I'm like, where do I sign? Like, are you kidding me? This place is unbelievable. And it's a shame. Bakersfield's looking for a new coach. There's a bunch of Pacific is looking for a new coach. And the problem is with these programs is that if Pepperdine is lacking in identity, imagine Pacific and Bakersfield, UC Riverside, all of these other schools that are out there that really don't have one. And I think that's the shame of it. That's the question. That's the biggest lurking question for me. The Power Five is going to be the Power Five, right? They're going to be the new, lower level minor league system for Major League Baseball, professional baseball. That's what I think what is the plan all along for Major League Baseball. And that's why they're cutting teams, cutting roster spots at the minor league level. Remember, the roster spots got cut after they cut the teams 2 years ago. Roster limitations have gone down. And so they're going to really use these Power Five schools as a feeder system. That should not deter a family or a kid from playing in a Power Four school, an IA school, Division III, JUCO. It should not. I think the biggest factor, having just gone through this the last couple of years with my son, who's a freshman in college and going to be a sophomore, is kids today are so geeked up by social media, right? We are in the, satisfaction now mentality, especially as it relates to sports and in baseball in particular, right? They want that D1 scholarship. They want to be known for posting their thing that I've committed to X, and so be it. I've got a couple of my son's friends who did the exact same thing a year ago, right? And I just saw yesterday on one that he's going to the transfer portal after leaving a Division I program. And that story is continuous. I have seen the change over the last year to 2 years from when I was coaching summer ball, travel ball team, while my son was in between junior and senior year, where kids' eyes have been opened to the JUCO, to the NAIA, to the Division II, Division III, because of the portal, COVID and the portal. As you see every year, these Division I schools, and I call college baseball today for ESPN, and I see it. These rosters are very old. They're not as old as they were 2-3 years ago because you still had the COVID hangover. But I think kids are starting to realize, wait a second, I'm 18, maybe 19 as a freshman, and I'm dealing with 21, 22-year-old kids. 2 years ago, you're dealing with 22, 23, 24-year-old kids. And I think that kind of put a stop to some parents and some kids and said, you know what, I'm going to go somewhere and I'm going to mature. I'm going to go to a JUCO, play my 50 games in the fall, go play my 50 games in the spring, take my chances and get my 300 at-bats for the year, as opposed to going to a Division I program. And yeah, you redshirt and you're dressing and all that stuff, but you get 0 at-bats, 0 development other than what you get at the practice field. And then you got to start that process over again. Oh, by the way, here I am. I'm going into the transfer portal. Remember me a year ago, what I did in high school? Nobody cares what they did a year ago in high school. They want to know what you did now. And that's the biggest thing. That kid's going to get overlooked because of the instant gratification of the portal and what the portal can bring to a program immediately.
I'm going to chime in on that. Victor, those are wonderful thoughts. I think one thing that families need to do, players need to do, families need to do, is sit down and scan, and you could do this. Go over the rosters of Division I programs. And I was a Division I coach my whole life, so I understand it. I'm not throwing anyone under the bus. And go find out how many freshmen made true contributions to the program they were in year one, okay? And I think that right there will turn the light on to, okay, I'm going to school, whatever, but I've got to be patient because I'm no different than that 95% who didn't play in the year one either. Okay. There's only very few Todd Heltons and Mark Kotze's and guys like that come through, and many guys from Vanderbilt that have come through as freshmen and hit the ground running. It's a process. But what's happening now in this industry is in year one is if they're not playing, then coaches are shipping them out. I've noticed just today, teams that are still playing in the regionals, guys are already entering the transfer portal. So they've already had their exit meeting and know they're out, and their team is still playing. And so it's, but I think that's important. I think parents need to be realistic. Players need to be realistic. It's not easy anymore. It's very difficult. And Victor brought up some great points. It's not easy to go in and make a huge contribution. So are you going to be patient and fight your way through it, which in my eyes is going to make you a stronger person in the end? Or are you going to say, I'm going in the portal because they didn't give me a shot?
There's two things, Walter, I'd like to, on the heels of that real quick, there's two things that as a parent, the two things I would absolutely, you have to take into consideration. If you are a young player going to your dream school to play for a coach and or develop under a coach that you know is going to develop you, I think you have to take that into consideration depending on what the scholarship is. If those three things aren't part of the equation, or you only have one of those three, then I really think you have to concentrate on what is the best option for your development. And look, there's some kids that can afford the opportunity to, take a bonus year, redshirt year, and because they want to be at a particular program with a particular coach. And I get that. But if you're not that guy and that's not your dream school, and you feel like, and there's a track record of that coach developing players and guys that have been there for 2-3 years, you really have to hit pause, because at the end of the day, if you're not on the field getting true game action, I'm not talking about sim games in the fall or anything like that, or getting in your eighth inning at bat in a 12-0 game against a Division III opponent. That's not development. You're not developing. And unfortunately, Dave, I've said this to you as well off air. Unfortunately, with the way the carousel is for coaching today, outside of the Tim Corbins of the world, Tony Vitellas and the like, right? Guys that have success and have stature and whatever. Outside of that carousel turns very rapidly. And if you're not winning, you're gone. And that's the biggest problem. Coaches realize they're getting hired and fired quicker than any other time in college baseball history. That's just a fact. That's what's happening. And those coaches that are coming into programs, they need to make an impact. You think they're going to make an impact immediately by going with 8 freshmen and saying, I'll take my chances with the kids? They're not. They're going into the portal. That's exactly what they're doing. Look at UCF. Rich Wallace came in midsummer. They knew they were going to the Big 12. They had to compete immediately. And what's he do? He goes out and gets veteran guys to play, and it's worked out for UCF. You got freshmen that were there, highly touted freshmen, recruits that got 0 at-bats this year. 0. And that tells you something. And these are kids that were really highly touted prospects going out of high school at UC or into UCF under Greg Lovelady. But that's the thing you have to keep in mind. How long's that coach been there? What's their track record for developing players? To me, that's the biggest question you can ask as a parent. Are you going to be able to develop my son? Because he's not a finished product. Very few guys are finished products when they step on a field. You mentioned Todd Helton and those type of players. Those guys are freaks of nature.
Yes.
Everyone needs some sort of development. And I think that's the biggest question that some parents need to ask before they commit their kid to possibly having to sit 1 year redshirting and then re-entering the whole transfer portal situation.
Wonderful point.
I think the biggest topic we should really kind of discuss, so from parents really have a good understanding, is this new legislation. We're going to see attrition. We already saw our Division III program, literally the school folded. We're going to see some schools give up certain sports. We're going to see some coaches that are going to lose their jobs because the school's going to eliminate baseball, or possibly such as the University of Hartford a few years ago, when Coach Blood was a Division I coach in a very fertile area of Connecticut, and then they became an NCAA Division III program. It's quite possible that, with this new legislation, we're going to see some Division I programs go down Division II, Division III, possibly. We could see a regionalized version of college baseball so that you're not going East Coast to West Coast. Maybe mid-majors are only traveling amongst, the Northeast corridor or the Southeast corridor or the West Coast, Pacific Northwest. Do you think that's something that could happen, Dave? And if you could talk a little bit about the conversations that go on in Omaha during the ABCA coaches meeting in Omaha, is this something that you think would be a topic of conversation amongst coaches?
I think it's been a topic of conversation for many years. I think with this new legislation, I think it pushes it closer to reality now. I think we're on the verge of seeing what you're talking about, where there may be 65 teams at a power conference, and then you're going to see the mid majors in a different division. And I think that's the only way you're going to be able to balance it out. I was on the phone last night with a current Big West coach, or Big West Conference coach, and I asked him, I said, how will you guys afford to do this? And he said, I think we're going to be able to afford to do it. It's not going to be easy. He talked about that there could be ways of cutting sports. That's why I brought that up earlier. Mm-hmm. But he says, but Dave, I'll be honest with you, across the board, I don't think every school in this conference is going to be able to do that. And being a veteran of the past in the Big West, I could see that. There's probably about 5 or 6 schools that can do it. Now, the other ones are going to have to decide, are we going forward with baseball? Or are we going to cut baseball? Or do we cut other sports to be able to take care of baseball? So it has been ongoing conversations, Walter. And I think that's why I think you've seen so many coaches over the last few years scramble to get to the Power 5 conference, even if they've given up a head coaching job to go be an assistant, because we saw the landscape getting ready to change. And that's why you've seen so many coaches that are scrambling to get to that level, because that might be, and I'm not here to be negative, I'm a realist, is that might be the only level that's going to be able to survive to play the College World Series at the highest level. There'll be a College World Series, but it'll be maybe a Division I AA like they do in football.
I saw Stephen F. Austin, was it today, left the WAC, yes. And I think they're going to the Southland.
Yep.
So you're starting to see it. You're starting to get the trickle down effect of it. And I think it's, like I said, once this legislation is done and the settlement is actually, everything is signed and agreed upon and it's implemented and the like, it's just like anything. It's like when NIL first came out, right? Everyone thought it was going to be the wild, wild west. It is to a certain degree, but it's not as crazy as everyone anticipated it was going to be. Because once you get into it, you understand what the parameters are and what you can and can't do. I think that's going to be the same case. It's interesting. Was it yesterday? They had the SEC meetings, and Trev Alberts, who left Nebraska to take over the AD situation at Texas A&M. And I'm going to read his quote because it's an interesting quote. He said yesterday in the spring meetings, quote, "We've just always had enough increasing revenue to overcome dumb expenses. I've said it 100 times, and I'll say it again. We don't have a revenue problem in college athletics. We have an expense problem." And it's really true to the extent that they've always been able to overcome. They've always been able to spend money, and they spend the money on what? Usually it's facilities. That's why you get all these unbelievable facilities that pop up, $50, $60 million. Arkansas's facility is beautiful. Tennessee's is beautiful. And because they've got to spend the money. Now it'll be really interesting how they're capable of taking the money that is going to be allocated to the program. And, Title IX is another one of those issues that needs to kind of play out as well. Because if you're not cutting sports, now that pot shrinks, right? So I get the excitement or the desire for people to want to, try to get out in front of all of this. But just like anything else, whenever there's a settlement, the lawyers still have to get involved. There's going to be a lot of fine print and small details And I think we have to wait till that all comes out before it impacts, families like myself that are currently with students in college. Because I can sit here and go, oh, well, guess what, Tyler? You come fall of 25, you're going to start getting paid to play baseball somewhere. That's not necessarily the case. I hope he's good enough to get the opportunity to do that. But that's never been his driving motivation for it. Like, he ultimately wants to play professional baseball, and that's where he will reap the rewards of all the hard work and dedication. I just hope that people don't put the cart ahead of the horse, especially from a parent's perspective, and say, "Oh, there's the cash cow." It's not the NIL; it's this getting paid thing. And now I can kind of put a number on what I feel I'm worth to your institution.
Victor, that's a powerful point that you're saying right there, and why I feel that way, and I think all three of us feel the same, or all three of us feel the same, is because we've gone through this. Okay,
Yeah.
We've gone through this with our sons. We've been involved with athletics our whole life. The unfortunate thing, that's fortunate for us, and it's been fortunate for our sons, our kids. But unfortunately for some of these kids, their parents haven't gone through this. So this becomes very overwhelming to them. And them getting that scholarship at the next level is like making the major leagues. You said it perfectly. His final stop, he wants to be a major leaguer one day. Okay. All this stuff is just a stepping stone to get there. And I don't think people are looking at it that way. We can look at it that way because we know there's a process to everything of climbing the ladder. But a lot of people aren't doing it. And I think that's what's making it difficult on some of these players now, because parents are putting so much pressure on them to get to that next level, and they're not doing it the right way, in my opinion.
I know how hard it is. You guys all know how hard it is to get to that level. I've seen it. I was a failed minor league player myself, right? I didn't advance the way that I should have, because I didn't put the time in, the work that I needed to do. That's neither here nor there. So while I know the experience and what it takes to get to that level, my internal timetable for Tyler is, I want to speed things up, but I know that's not realistic. So I have to kind of reel myself in. That's me with having grown up in the game. I'm 56 years old. I've been in the game of baseball for 56 years because of my dad, right? Mm-hmm. I have to slow myself down. How does the average parent of a kid that has never been exposed to professional sports slow things down? And I think that's the biggest thing. You talk about, from a baseball perspective, slow the game down when you're starting to teach things, right? Don't let the game speed up on you. I think what happens all too often is the bright lights of travel baseball and the promise from a coach or an organization or a showcase or whatever the case may be, that, hey, your kid is he was featured in X program's Twitter feed, and now he's got a grade to him. And it's like, in their minds, they're speeding things up. Like, okay, now he's got this grade. He should be able to get X, Y, and Z. That's not how it works. You really, really have to slow things down as a parent and just let it come to you. I remember a scout. I was at a very small school in northern Georgia, and I remember a scout. I was talking to him before a game, and I said, I'm in northern Georgia. And this was obviously in the late 80s, mid to late 80s. I'm like, how are people going to find me? He goes, listen, you're better off being a big fish in a small pond than a small fish in a big pond. I have never forgotten that quote, and it made perfect sense. And it was an NAIA school at the time, small little school, and I ended up going to Lewis Clark and played for the great Ed Sheff in Lewiston, Idaho. And it's so true. Like, I was at a nothing school. I took care of the controllables of what I could control, and I was able to get to a powerhouse NAIA program that ended up winning the national championship the year I was there. So parents really, it's hard. Trust me, I know how hard it is, because it's hard for me to do it. I can only imagine how much more difficult it is for the parent that doesn't have that experience.
Well, Victor, I want to throw this out at you. I know last week you were in Arlington, Texas, and you were covering the Big 12 tournament. Okay.
Yep.
You've done many years of covering baseball for the Angels and for the MLB Network. As you sat in the booth last week and covered games, and I think this is important for parents to hear this, how much of a difference, if there was a difference, as you were sitting in the booth calling those games, that you could say there was from the Big 12 and that talent level and Major League Baseball? Because I'm going to guess you're going to say not much. And that's what you're putting your kids into, and that's how much more prepared they need to be. Would you agree with me on that?
I would agree to the point that they are on the track to being a professional baseball player. There are some guys that stand out hands and shoulders above everybody else. Like that guy, Kalen Culpepper, the shortstop for Kansas State. That dude's got big leagues written all over. I mean, it's just the mannerisms, the way he plays, the way he moves, the hands when he swings the bat. It's just a different world. There's guys like that. There is a separation. Trust me. If people think that jumping from high school to Division I is hard, the jump from Division I to being a successful minor leaguer is even harder. That I truly believe that. I really believe that, because at the Division I level, and I don't want to steal your thunder, Dave. You've done it. You've coached it. At the Division I level, there are opportunities sometimes present themselves that are beyond the coach's control. Your guy gets hurt. Your junior starting shortstop gets hurt. You don't have a choice but to play what you have on your bench, right? Mm-hmm. At the professional ranks, it's like you move them to the side, right. And there's another guy that's right there that's just as good. May not be the 5-star prospect, but he's just as good. And I think there is there are some dips in the talent pool, even at the Division I level, but it's a different animal, and that's why I sit there and I evaluate my son. Right? Do I think my son can play Division I baseball and start today? No, I do not. I'm realistic in that he's only 18 and a half. He didn't turn 19 until September, and he's going to be a redshirt freshman come the fall. Do I think eventually he'll be there? Absolutely. I think because of the work ethic. Now, anything can happen. His game could not progress, right? That's the realist in me. He could hit a wall, and that happens. That happens to kids. It happens at 13. It happens at 16. It happens at 19. Happens at 21. There's guys that sign professional contracts that at 22, 23, they're done because they've hit the wall. They see the writing on the wall. They don't see the light at the end of the tunnel where they can continue their path forward to get to a higher level and actually make some money. And they figure they want to get it, or they're burned out because they've been doing it since they were 8 years old. And that grind gets old. So I think that's the biggest thing as parents is that, like, really keeping your feet on the ground. It's exciting. Look, when a coach calls or a recruiter touches base with you, I get it. It's super exciting. And it's like I told Tyler a year ago, it's like, just tap the brakes, keep your feet on the ground. Let's do things slowly and do the homework before you do something that you're going to regret. And I think that's the hardest part as a parent. If it's really hard for me, it's hard for a lot of people. But to your point, Dave, there is a separation. There's no doubt about it. But that level of, I think about teams like, South Lake Carroll in Texas, JSerra in California, Harvard Westlake, Chaminade in California, Stone Douglas here in Florida. Those are all great high school programs, big time programs, right? You might get a freak school that has 3 or 4 Division I guys that are going to go and be impact guys. But for the most part, a lot of those kids are going to be sitting in year one and more than likely going to be redshirting unless something happens to those kids. And these are big time programs with high echelon players that are still going to sit when they go to their Division I program.
And I want to emphasize on that point. I, as a parent, would rather my son redshirt than get 5 to 10 at bats or 5 innings on the mound.
Yep.
I would rather save that year and let him get some reps on the side, go out to summer ball, and still have people frown on the word redshirt. Okay, of taking a year and just developing and I agree with you, Victor. You only develop by getting reps on the field, by playing, taking live at bats and throwing live to live hitters, but a redshirt year is not a bad thing. I would much rather do that than have minimal at-bats where you just wasted one of your precious 4 opportunities to play college baseball.
This is going to be probably a weekly discussion. And the next time the 3 of us get together, I want to make sure that we begin to put some of the pieces to the puzzle together. And I'm going to leave you on this. if you're watching Major League Network, MLB Network, and you start to notice that, hey, they're doing a college tour, facilities tour at LSU, or hey, they're doing a facilities tour at Texas A&M, there's a reason for that. There's a reason why MLB is connecting dots with some of these programs. And we'll get into that discussion next week when we talk again. But consider this, as Dave and I have alluded to in the past, we're going to begin to bring in the academic people, the financial aid people, the people that make the college experience as its collective whole. We want you to see the entirety of the process behind the scenes. So that's really what we're going to begin to discuss a little bit more in depth over the next few episodes or next few podcasts. But Coach, thank you. I know you have some things you got to get to, and Victor, really glad that you can begin to join us and begin to share with us and the viewers and the listeners some experiences that you go through every single week, whether it's broadcasting or a major league field near you. But guys, let's pick this up next week, and we'll kind of take it to episode 2 as part of the trilogy, I guess.
Appreciate it, guys.
Thank you, guys.
All right, we're going to talk next week. Go ahead and subscribe. And you have a question for Victor and or Coach, make sure you put it down below in the comments section, and have a great week in baseball.